News right here on Salam Media. My name is Julie Ali. Thank you for your company. And I do apologize. We've not had a news bulletin today because Jadwat obviously has gone out on the protest march. He is holding the flag very high for the workers. He believes in the workers and that. Corruption must fall and the high cost of living has to come down. But he certainly will be with you tomorrow morning and will be bringing you the news bulletin tomorrow morning. Okay, so next, another very, very important discussion that we are having, and that has to do with the unlawful entry on premises bill. This is set to reform South African trespassing laws. The Department of Justice and Constitutional Development has drafted a bill to repeal and replace the Trespass Act number 6 of 1959, which will also prohibit unlawful entry on a premises. To talk to us about this, just to unpack what it means for property owners. What does it mean for land invaders? What does it mean as far as criminality is concerned? We have LLD Candidate in Constitutional Property Law and a public interest lawyer, Tanveer Jeewa. Nice to have you on the show. Welcome. And complicated matter, is it not?
Absolutely complicated. And I'm glad we're having this conversation to maybe unpack it a bit further.
Okay, when I came across this, the first thing that went through my mind is what happens, and I hope I'm not confused here, what happens if I own a farm or a small plot of land, or even in the suburbs, and I have unwanted, guests on my property, people burglaring, coming onto my property? What are my rights? And what happens when, if you believe that your life is being threatened, and you protect yourself, you have a firearm, you hurt, maim, injure, or kill the perpetrator? What happens then? So I'd like you to unpack all of that for me on the show this morning. So that's my introductory question, and I have a few more for you. Would you like to start at that point?
Sure, Julie. Thank you for that. I think what you're speaking about more specifically relates to self-defense, right? And I think it's a question that a lot of people have had. If there's a burglary and I'm acting on self-defense right now, what does this bill mean for me? And the reason why people are actually confused about that is because the bill gives you a duty to call the police the moment you notice there is someone who's trespassing on your property. But I think it's important to note that the bill hasn't passed into law now already. You need to be able to comment, and you can. You can comment on the bill as public participation. But the point of what you're asking is, does that duty to call the police mean that if you haven't called the police, you can't really act in self-defense? Like you said, there's a burglar, there's a robber. Can you not do something, maybe even injure them? Well, you can, right? Because it's important to understand that self-defense is on a case-by-case basis. Obviously, the way you act towards a small child entering your property, whether they're allowed to or not, is very different from the way you're acting when this person is clearly a thief who's trying to injure you. And the court will take that into account. And in that objective test, the court will put itself in your shoes and think to itself, what would I have done in that moment? And based on that, the court will assess whether you would have had the time, maybe, Julie, to call the police. And if you hadn't, maybe that's a fair assessment in the moment. But just to say that this doesn't necessarily affect your rights in that moment to defend yourself, but it's something that maybe we should take account of when we're commenting on the bill to Parliament.
Okay, excuse my cynicism, but I thought that was laughable when it was suggested that you call the police. What are the chances that they're going to be there to assist you maybe 24 hours later, or never for that matter? But that's just me being very cynical. All right, let's get to the questions to hand. Why is there a call for this Trespass Act to be scrapped?
Very important question, because the Trespass Act you've mentioned, it was enacted in 1959, which obviously is full on during apartheid. And it's important to note the history of the Trespass Act, right? It was used daily, at some stage even to arrest up to 6,000 people, and along with the pass laws, right? So the Trespass Act was put into place specifically to stop Black people, and by Black people I mean here Africans, colored people, Indian people, to move into urban areas where they're supposed to work. So the moment you would try to go and you would step outside of your workplace, maybe, onto somewhere else, you will be immediately fined, immediately sent to jail. So the important part here is the act is not unconstitutional. And Minister Lamola has said that. It's not unconstitutional, but given its history of being used in such an oppressive manner, the parliament thought it best to introduce this bill to replace that oppressive act. But again, important to note that does the bill really do something different from the act? Not really.
Okay, and of course, that brings back very dark memories for people in South Africa of the Dompas laws. People, black people couldn't move around freely without that Dompas. And if they didn't have it, you know what the consequences were: into jail and hefty fines, which they couldn't even afford because they were not allowed to be employed. They were restricted in where they could and could not move around for employment. The other issue regarding trespassing and land invasion, they're two different issues. But will this bill be addressing those two issues differently or in the same vein?
Okay. So there is a court case for the Constitutional Court in 2020 that the EFF brought to the Constitutional Court. It's important because that was the question that it asked. And the court said that the Trespass Act is not unconstitutional because if you have stayed on the land for a certain amount of months and you are what people call an unlawful occupier, you are automatically protected by another piece of legislation, that is the Prevention of Illegal Eviction. Lawyers will call it PI, and I will use the word PI here. So you're automatically protected by PI already. And that was the case already under the Trespass Act. The difference here is that the unlawful entry bill is stating these things out loud to clarify the situation, which is that if you thought that you had an entitlement to the land, for example, if you thought you had title, that's what it says. And title, a lot of us will know, it means if you thought you owned the land or if you thought there's a title deed somewhere. Now, that's very rare. People don't really walk around thinking they just own land. That's not a thing. But the interesting part is the second part, which says if you think you have an interest in the land. And under property law, when you think you have an interest, it means if you think maybe that you're entitled to rent the place. I'll give you an example. There are a lot of times in what we call hijack buildings, people will pretend that they own the land and will rent it to you. So maybe you are genuinely under the impression that you're renting the land. And that's what the bill is speaking about. Does it facilitate land invasion? Absolutely not. What people call land invasion, what is unlawful occupation, is still very much unlawful. That is clear in its name. But I want you to remember the important distinction, which is what the bill is doing, is it's telling you whether this person who has entered on your property should go to jail or not. You still have many avenues under the law in court. You can go for an interdict.
Tanveer, this is where I'm confused. The PI Act is then going to protect those invaders. That's the sad part, is it not?
So the PI Act, obviously, as you would know, has been here for a very long time. And you were just speaking now about the atrocities that we have all gone through during apartheid. And you will know, obviously, you'll be familiar with the housing crisis that has sprouted out of that apartheid situation, right? And a lot of times, again, it's not to say that PI is allowing you to go occupy land. You're still not allowed to do that. What PI says is if you've been there for a number of months, in order for you to be removed from that land, and you shouldn't be homeless, right? There's a duty on the state. And all that PI does is it tells you that you cannot just make people homeless. You need to go to court and then remove people. And I think there is a balance there to strike because of the apartheid past that we're facing, because of high levels of homelessness and the housing crisis. But again, you've mentioned this very clearly. This is what PI has always been doing. The unlawful entry bill doesn't clash with that. That was always the case.
It seems as if we're then going to be doing government's job. If somebody invades my property or my land, hijacks my house or my building, I'm going to have to take them to court at my cost. I'm going to have to find them suitable accommodation, all at my cost. time, money, and other resources, obviously. This needs to be looked at very, very carefully, because it does disadvantage one sector of the economy or the population against another. And I do hear what you're saying is apartheid has created issues around homelessness. And if this is government's way of addressing it, they are now creating people, another sector of the community or the population, to become disadvantaged regarding this matter. I hope you understand where I'm going to with this. Uh,
Absolutely.
okay, so let's get back to the trespass and land invaders, which I think you've partly answered already. Uh, it does then seem to me, as I've just indicated, that trespassers and land invaders seem more protected by the law than law abiding citizens.
Judy, actually, I wanted to address this question and also what you've mentioned before, right? Because I think that's very important distinction. Julie, you stay at home, you go home every day. You will notice if there's someone on your land. Absolutely. There's no way you will not notice if there's someone trying to stay on your land. Now, if you have a fifth property that you rarely go to, it's unoccupied and maybe that's occupied, then it will take you a while to notice that land is unoccupied. And the importance is to obviously realize people's immediate need for a place to stay, as opposed to you having a fifth property that you never go to. But again, you've made a very important point, which is obviously you are entitled to protections as a property owner. You've still bought that land, you still have protection. And that is the important thing, that the unlawful entry bill, what it aims to do is put trespass as a crime, right? The people who you can take to court and go to jail and you can call the police, that still very much applies if someone just enters your property randomly. It's obviously different now if they've stayed there for long. Now, whether that protects them or not is another question. And the reason I'm saying this is this bill focuses on sending them to jail or giving them a fine. It doesn't mean they get to stay on your land. It doesn't mean you get to do nothing about it. What it just means is if the police takes them to court now, they get to say, well, you know what? I genuinely thought Julie's home, like I genuinely thought Julie rented this place to me. That's why I was staying there. And then the court will say, well, either that was reasonable or not. But the point is, they are still removed from your house. It's just a matter of, do they go to jail? Do they get a fine, or do they get nothing? So I think we need to reinterrogate what we believe is protection in these cases.
And over and above of all of this that you and I have discussed thus far, the PI Act will not be affected at all. That still
Absolutely not.
remains. So my final question to you then, Tanveer, is with this new bill, to me, it still seems more skewed towards land invasion issues rather than addressing trespassing in its real sense. Would I be correct in thinking that?
The reason I would say no is just because it's similar to the Trespass Act. So if you thought already that the Trespass Act was skewed, then you will still think this bill is skewed. I think the only difference it makes here is it's clarifying the position that already existed. So whether you think that is skewed is obviously going to be up to the person. I don't personally think it's skewed because it's still a matter of, does this person end up in jail? Do they get a fine? But either way, they are removed from your property. And the law pretty much stays the same, which is why Minister Lamola had said that there are things like, for example, self-defense and stuff that is still protected under very different laws. So the bill doesn't affect these things.
Can you just indulge me for one last question,
Sure.
please, very quickly? Is Lamola addressing the situation of informal settlements that seem to spring up overnight on people's possibly unused land? In and around urban areas as well. You may have a plot of land just outside of a large city, and overnight you see these informal settlements springing up. What is the landowner's rights there? Where and how does government step in to stop that invasion? However, we also are cognizant of the fact that these are desperate homeless people.
Sure. I mean, thank you for that, Julie, because I think it is a very important question. And the point of that, very importantly, is that he is not addressing the issue of informal settlements with this bill. But importantly, this bill is not the place to even address the issues. Look, we are all very aware that having informal settlements spring up, having unlawful occupied, it is a very real issue that needs to be addressed by the government. Like you said, it's not a property owner's job to provide housing to people. As a
Absolutely.
single person, you're not supposed to give housing to 10,000 people. That would be expecting absolutely crazy things from you. But the point is that what the government should be doing is it should be looking at its housing policies. It should be looking at how it constantly fails these people and do better. Now, the rights of the landowners is, like I said, the moment someone has trespassed on your land, you were already entitled to call the police to remove these people on your land. The things start getting murkier when people have stayed on your land for longer periods of time. Now, like I said, it will depend on who you are, how many properties you have, for you to not notice that someone has been on your land for 7 months. You can imagine that if there's an informal settlement on your land, you will definitely notice. So in response to that, you can still go to the police to have them removed. And the quicker you act, the better it is for you. Otherwise, you will have to deal with PI and a lot of other pieces of legislation.
Tanveer, this is a discussion we have to follow through, very especially regarding land invasion. I think we need to understand what can be done, what should be done, and how we as a community or a nation moves forward. So hopefully you will be available in the next few weeks to take this issue up further. But thank you indeed
Absolutely.
for clarifying those issues. Nothing to worry about. Now I can sigh with relief. What can I say? But lovely talking to you. Go well.
Thank you so much, Julie. It was much appreciated. Thank you.
9:40 exactly, news and views. We are coming up to our final interview for the morning. Another very important discussion to be had. We have online Lindo Kule Mdabe, and they are attorney. He's an attorney at Lawyers for Human Rights. We also have convener of the Global South Against Xenophobia, Rushila Nair, to talk about ZEP holders. Those are the people from Zimbabwe that have been in the country for a couple of years in meaningful jobs, and their term seems to be coming to an end in December. What is going to happen to these people? How does it impact on us, on the economy, and how do we move forward on this matter? Please stand by. We'll be joined by our two guests in a minute or two.